Today, of course, Shemini Atzeret marks the first yahrzeit for 1,200 human beings murdered by Hamas. You likely remember exactly where you were when you heard the news trickling in from Israel, 7 hours ahead of us. I was here, of course, right here on this bima. I'll never forget it. We began the service with prayers for peace, and I announced that Israel had been invaded by land and air and sea, and that reports were coming in that 50 people had been murdered by terrorists. And 50 seemed like such an enormous number. I remember how the number got caught in my throat. In the days and weeks that followed, we learned that it was so much worse. So now, a year later, we are here as mourners to mourn our own personal losses as we do on every Yizkor day, and we are here also to mourn a collective grief. Personal grief and collective grief intertwine now. They speak to each other, they relate to one another. I've seen mourners wear their kriya ribbons right next to their yellow ribbons for the hostages. How much grief can a heart hold? I've learned that the firsts are hard for mourners. The first birthday without him, the first Seder without her, the first Father's Day, Mother's Day, the first Rosh Hashanah. I experienced an echo of this year as I struggled to move through the rhythm of time. Last Sukkot, I had trouble putting away the decorations from my sukkah. They just sat in the hallway, waiting to go up to the attic. Not until Hanukkah did I put them away. And I just read that one Israeli father still has not taken down his sukkah from last year because his son, Guy Gilboa Dalal, 22 years old, promised his father that he would help him put the family sukkah away as soon as he got back from the Nova Festival. So now it is frozen in time, and Ilan is waiting for his son's return from Gaza captivity. I also remember feeling very guilty taking a vacation over winter break. I didn't post any pictures on social media because it felt so wrong. I was embarrassed to be enjoying the fullness of life when everything had changed. I've heard mourners speak similarly in the shadow of their personal loss. You might go to one sunny spot or another, but it feels off. This is grief talking. The first Seder this year was especially strange. Remember, we put out an empty chair or yellow tulips at the center of the table. How could we dare celebrate our festival of freedom when more than 100 of our brothers and sisters are held in captivity? But we did. Somehow we did, because the calendar carries us along through our grief. And then came the trepidation in the weeks leading up to October 7th. I'm sure you felt it. The secular yahrzeit day. The parallels are apparent. As the first yahrzeit approached, congregant mourners are also filled with anxiety and sadness, swelling to the surface again. Just when they thought they'd found their feet, again, you feel vulnerable. Similarly, when October 7th arrived, it was a heavy and quiet day. And I was sad being alone, and I was sad being with others, and I didn't know where to put myself. And then I realized, this is the grief talking. This is how mourners feel as the first yahrzeit approaches. That evening, 25,000 stood together in solemn silence here in Toronto, and it was remarkable. I've never seen so many Jews stand so quietly and so still for an hour and a half. The comfort came for me less from what was said or sung on the stage or screen, but more from the crowd, from the people. When we gather for Yizkor, it's like that too. The comfort comes less from the words said or sung, and more from the gathering itself, from the shared solemnity. Our sanctuary is a container that holds our grief. And just days ago, on Yom Kippur afternoon, we expanded our Eila Ezkara to include testimonials and candles and 36 minutes of slow scrolling the faces of those beautiful lives cut short. And then I admit, and I'll be curious to hear if it was the same for you, I felt something lift. I felt something shift. Something softened, something eased for me. And I wondered, is this how a mourner feels after the first yahrzeit passes? Of course, the pain of the loss is still there. Of course, we never forget. But I felt less focused on how it all began, less focus on the loss, and more on how will this grief end? I was suddenly able to shift my gaze from the past towards the future. What will become of us? What will be for us? What could be? What ought to be? What work must be done to bring us ever forward? Is this how it is for mourners when they finally find themselves on the other side of the first yahrzeit? Are you somehow released from the heavy grief? For some, yes, and for some, no. Of course, everyone grieves uniquely. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Grief is a dance. So I shouldn't have been surprised when, over the last couple of days, I've spoken with 3 Israeli friends. In each conversation, I asked them if they feel something different now. And each one answered with a series of questions. How can it be different when the hostages are still there? How can we feel any relief when tens of thousands of evacuees still can't return to their homes? How can we settle back into the fullness of life when hardly a day goes by without more than 100 rockets falling on northern and central Israel? How can we breathe when our children are on the front lines of the battlefield? How can we find a moment of joy when there are so many with amputated limbs just now learning how to walk again? How can we keep from despairing when our government gives us no vision for the day after? Of course, I shouldn't have been surprised because everyone grieves uniquely, because grief is a dance. Sometimes 2 steps back and only a half step forward. Even in the same family, I've noticed, and of course we are family, diaspora Jewry and Israelis, but in our own personal families it can be this way too. When the first yahrzeit comes and goes, one sibling is ready to remember his parent with laughter, and the other sibling only with tears. And it can be agitating. There can be tension between them. The one with laughter wants the one in tears to laugh with him. The one in tears wants the one in laughter to cry with him. But it seems that God doesn't really care how we grieve, how a mourner mourns, so long as we mourn with a full heart. It can be a joyful heart. It can be a broken heart. It can be a joyful, broken heart all at once. Because as it is written in the Talmud, Rachamana liba ba'eh, God desires the heart. There have been many recent debates about how to approach, how to treat this Simchat Torah, this first yahrzeit of the deadliest massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Last year, when the news was trickling in and we didn't yet comprehend the scale of the losses, we at Holy Blossom decided that adults would not wave flags, but children would. That adults would not dance the 7 hakafot, but the children would, because they are our future. Thank you. And because we have to fill them up with Simchat Torah memories that will last them a lifetime. and it was the right decision then. But tonight will be different. Tonight we will all dance. Some with joyful hearts, some with broken hearts, some with angry hearts, some with joyful, broken, angry hearts all at once. But we will take up the defiant call of the Nova Festival survivals, and we will join them. We will dance again. After the Yom Kippur War, 1973, which left so many dead, wounded, and maimed, there was also the same question of whether or not to celebrate the fall festivals, and if so, how. In an essay entitled Against Despair, Elie Wiesel said then, on the eve of Simchat Torah following the war, rabbis were faced with a question about whether or not their congregation should celebrate this joyful holiday, and the answer was unequivocal. Yes, they should. Never mind that it wasn't easy to rejoice. Never mind that we don't feel like singing and dancing. Never mind that there were so many reasons against the celebration. We must celebrate. And I know in my bones that this is true for us now. A note came across social media from an IDF reservist now stationed in Lebanon. May God watch over him. He wrote to anyone who might see it, Chag Sameach. If anyone is able to carry my children on their shoulders tonight and dance with them for this holy day, it would be a blessing. And I have no doubt that there was a lineup of volunteers at that soldier's shul, volunteers of his friends and neighbors, volunteers of off-duty soldiers and complete strangers, ready, willing, and able to dance with his children and to give them a joyful memory of Simchat Torah. So bring your dancing shoes tonight at 7 o'clock. There will be consecration students who are just learning the Aleph Bet and are being gifted their first little baby Torah. They will carry them proudly tonight. And our teenagers will carry our 11 Sifrei Torah across the balconies, leading us, welcoming the Sifrei Torah into our sanctuary. And one way or another, we will dance again. Contemporary poet and childhood friend Rabbi Hannah Yerushalmi admits, there is a bitterness I can't deny, but I will still go. And when I do, I will dance with anger and I will dance with rage. And if by chance some joy might come my way, Ana Adonai, help me find the courage to surrender to it. What kind of joy do we who mourn seek now? Even when it isn't easy to be on the lookout for joy. Where might we find it? Where might we demand it of ourselves? And this isn't a simple joy. Don't misunderstand me. Rabbi Alan Liu, from his book, This is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared, wrote about a deep joy that we find particularly helpful now. He says, when we speak of joy here, we're not speaking of fun. Joy is a deep release of the soul, and it includes death and pain. Joy is any feeling fully felt, any experience we give our whole being to. We are conditioned to choose pleasure and to reject pain, but the truth is, any moment of our life fully inhabited, any feeling fully felt, any immersion in the full depth of life can be a source of deep joy. As the psalmist says, tremble and be joyful. This is the joyful dance of a mourner. You know it well. You who have come to mourn this day, you know it well. This is the joyful dancer of a people grieving. We know it well. Kohelet is the wisdom literature assigned to this festival, Zman Simchatenu. A wisdom, it is also the wisdom of our new Torah mantle. insisting that there is a time for every experience under heaven, a time to wail and a time to dance. And sometimes the wail is the dance, and sometimes the dance is the wail. Yehuda Amichai challenges the claim that we have enough time to experience every experience under heaven uniquely. He says it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes the experiences fold in on one another, conflate. And I'll conclude with his words. A man in his lifetime has no time to have time for everything. He has no room to have room for every desire. Ecclesiastes was wrong to claim that. A man has to hate and love all at once, with the same eyes to cry and to laugh, with the same hands to throw stones and to gather stones, to make love in war and war in love, and hate and forgive and remember and forget, and make order and confuse, and eat and digest what long history does in so many years. A man in his lifetime has no time. When he loses, he seeks. When he finds, he forgets. When he forgets, he loves. When he loves, he begins to forget. And his soul is knowledgeable and very professional. It is only his body that remains an amateur always. His body tries and fumbles. He doesn't learn and get confused, drunk and blind in his pleasures and pain. And then comes autumn, when he will die like a fig, shriveled, sweeter, full of himself, and the leaves dry out on the ground, and the naked branches point to the place where there is time for everything.